California politicians and their friends in the liberal media will continue to tell you that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the way the state conducts its elections. But coming up, I'll tell you about the damning results and findings of an election integrity audit conducted by a nonpartisan organization that provides ample proof that, yes, voter fraud does occur in the state of California. We'll also talk about what we can do to reform California's elections to restore public trust and confidence. I'm Carl DeMaio, chairman of Reform California, and we've got the receipts. We've got the receipts, the evidence, the proof, whatever you want to call it, that California elections are filled with opportunities for voter fraud, and that we absolutely need to have a complete overhaul of the way in which our state conducts its elections. Now, if you listen to California politicians who've created this bad election process and their friends in the liberal media, they'll tell you that there's absolutely nothing wrong, that the elections are perfectly secure, and that anyone who's raising an issue is just a conspiracy theorist. Well, the Transparency Foundation, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, has done an exhaustive analysis and investigation on California's election systems and processes. They've done audits of actual ballots, and the findings of their report for the 2021-2022 California election cycle literally should result in a federal judge putting the entire state under receivership as it relates to its elections and the way in which they're conducted. Let me go through some of these findings. And in full transparency on the Transparency Foundation, I serve on the board of directors of the Transparency Foundation. It does its own research. It does nonpartisan review. It does not get involved in any sort of politics or take positions on candidates or ballot measures. Reform California certainly does. So the information I'm talking about right now is from their nonpartisan research program. And I challenge any politician or member of the media who in any way disagrees, show us the proof that any of this is wrong, because the Transparency Foundation in this report has ample evidence and documentation. The first thing that you should know is that the Transparency Foundation starts out with a 10-point election integrity scorecard. And so there's a scoring mechanism that they're using to look at the state of California. The 10 points cover the full range of what you'd want to see in a way in which an election is handled. First, does the public have trust and confidence? Second, is there an accurate maintenance of voter lists? Third, does the state verify the identity of voters when they're voting? Fourth, do you confirm the eligibility and citizenship of people who register to vote initially? Fifth, is it easy to vote? Sixth, are the systems that collect and tabulate the results, are they secure from hacking? Seventh, do government officials and politicians get involved in elections? Do they try to influence or interfere in the election? Eighth, when you're voting on ballot measures, are you given an accurate and honest description of what you're voting on? Ninth, can individuals track their ballot to make sure that it was received and counted? And if there's a problem, is there an opportunity and time for them to cure the problem so their vote counts? And 10, is there a system in place to check and verify through post-election audits that the rules were actually followed and administered in an even-handed manner? Well, California, no surprise, fails 9 out of 10 of these criteria. It gets a big old F on the Transparency Foundation's election integrity report card. Let me share with you some of the damning numbers. I'll highlight some of the numbers first. 14.17, that is the fraud detection rate. The fraud detection rate. What is the fraud detection rate? The Transparency Foundation looked at ballots that were rejected by counties where the signature did not match. And even after the voter was given ample opportunity to verify that, yes, that's their signature, yes, they submitted that ballot, the individual still did not respond. So that is a ballot that was uncured, that was rejected for a mismatched signature. So even after the voter was given ample time, the county never heard for them. And so we took that list and examined, did the person actually attempt to vote? So investigators spent months calling, emailing, contacting, texting these individuals. And 14.17% of them said that they did not vote. 14.17. That is astonishingly high. And it's absolute evidence of voter fraud because someone got that ballot and submitted it on their behalf. 56% of ballots rejected for mismatched signatures statewide did not get cured. So the assumption is that voter did not submit the ballot. Because if you voted and your signature wasn't matched, of course you're going to say, well, yes, that's my signature. Yes, I wanted to vote. So the people who don't respond, that group of people, there's a higher suspicion, a higher risk that those people probably did not submit that ballot in the first place. Signature checks are actually not done in a consistent or uniform manner. One county can have a very lackadaisical way of reviewing signatures. Sacramento County had a 438% lower rejection rate on signatures when compared with the statewide average. 9.2%, that was the percentage of households who reported receiving an erroneous ballot. That's for someone who doesn't live there, someone who's dead, or having a duplicate or triplicate ballot for someone at the house when they should have only received one ballot. That means that almost 1 out of 10 households got a bad ballot, at least one bad ballot. And that suggests that the state's voter lists have been poorly maintained, that we're mailing out ballots to people who no longer live at a certain location. 6 million, the number of people who have left the state of California since 2010. And the reason why this number is important is that the state of California's system, its database for cleansing its voter lists, it does not track when someone leaves the state and registers in another state. So there's a large group of people who remain on the voter rolls because California refuses to invest in and participate in checking to see whether people move out of the state and register somewhere else. That leads to this next number, 1.18 million. These are the estimated number of inactive voters that are currently listed as active on the state's voter rolls. Many of them probably are people who've left long ago. Inactive voters are people who haven't voted in the last 4 to 6 elections, and they're presumed to either no longer be at that location or no longer alive, or perhaps they've moved to another state. Now, into all of this, we also see the possibility of an attempt to suppress voter participation. There was an 87% reduction in polling stations in one county, San Diego County. And this is important to understand because conservative voters prefer to vote on election day, not by mail. And so if you reduce the number of polling stations, knowing that conservative voters and Republican voters want to vote on election day, and that Democrat voters like the mail-in ballot, if you're going after one mode of communication and restricting it intentionally, you're potentially suppressing the vote. And I think that the case is strong that they tried to suppress the vote, and that is illegal under federal voting laws. 0%. This is the percent of editorials in the Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, or Sacramento Bee that raised any of the problems that are documented well in this report. You can't trust the liberal media to be honest about this problem, to report on it, because apparently they like the outcome of these elections. And contrast that to 60%. This is the percentage of California voters in the recent IGS Berkeley poll that said that they are very concerned about election fraud. 60%. Now, let me go through a couple items here in more, in more detail. Go to the first criteria, and that is public trust and confidence. When the politicians say that nothing's wrong with our voting, and when the media basically glosses over any of these problems, recognize that the voters are smart enough to detect that there's some problems going on. As I mentioned, that Berkeley Institute of Government Studies poll, it was released in November of 2022, shows that Californians are concerned about election security, voter fraud, that 60% number I mentioned, and it is a bipartisan concern. You've got almost half of Democrats who are concerned about election security. I think the number is 44% on the issue of, do you consider election security in the U.S. to be strong or under threat? 44% say it's under threat. 74% say election security is under threat. 46% of independents say election security is under threat. A total of 52% say it's, quote, under threat. That's on election security. When it comes to the issue of whether people voting or casting ballots illegally in elections, that's where you get the 60% number. You've got major threat, 39%, minor threat, 21%, not a threat at all, 35%. So you have about a third of the voters who think that the election is okay, but 2/3 are unsure or think that there's a big problem here. And again, you've got 25% of Democrats saying that people voting illegally in elections is a major threat. 25%. 45% combined say it's a minor or major threat together. That's of Democrats. And but independents, it's 37% saying it's a major threat to have people voting illegally in elections, for a total of 59% calling it a major or minor threat combined. So this is not a partisan issue. This is a bipartisan issue. You cannot have a healthy democracy when these levels of chunks of voters are concerned with voter fraud. And what you're seeing right now is the media and politicians who run the roost here in California are denying that there's any problem. In other words, they're out of step with the public. So that's why the Transparency Foundation failed California on the first criteria, which is, does the public have a level of trust and confidence in California elections? And the answer is hells no. The data shows it. And it's even a Berkeley poll. So go figure. The second criteria, maintenance of voter lists, it fails. California, and the report actually describes the weak approach to the VoteCal system that's been set up to try to cleanse and maintain voter lists. It's absolutely inadequate. The report details all sorts of problems with that system. All sorts of restrictions on registrars or voters in each county, taking people off the voter lists when they find that they're not active or that they're no longer at their residence. The Reform California survey showed that 9.2% of households in 2020 did not get or received a ballot that was erroneous. Take a look at the next survey, and that is the Reform California team did an audit of inactive voters, and they looked at 7.1% in their sample universe. And they found in that sample universe 83,725 inactive voters on the voter rolls that were still listed as active, for a potential inactive error rate of 1.18 million on the voter rolls that should not be on the voter rolls because they've been inactive. Duplicate or triplicate registrations in the sample, 0.37%, was detected. And this is an easy way to detect duplicates is you take the birth date of a voter in the same house, and if two voters have the same birth date, you can either dealing with an issue of twins or triplets, or you're dealing with the potential that there's a duplicate or triplicate ballot being sent to that house. And typically people get a duplicate or triplicate ballot because their name is slightly off, and so they're now registered 2 times or 3 times. The motor voter law from 2016 created a lot of duplicates and triplicates in our voter file. Erroneous ballots for people who moved. That's, again, a harder analysis because the government has databases that detect people moving from their property. The best one that we could use publicly is the National Change of Address database. And even with that, the NCOA database, which only about 20%, 15% of people actually participate in, the Postal Service Change of Address database, it shows a substantial number of people are still getting ballots at homes, even though the Postal Service says, stop mailing them to this location. You should check with the National Change of Address Registry. A few years ago, Judicial Watch sued the County of Los Angeles for some of these problems, and they identified that Los Angeles County had more people on their voter rolls than the census confirmed they had people living in the county. And again, there's a lot of illegal immigrants and non-citizens in LA County, so that's a big deal. A total of 1,207,613 ineligible or inactive voters were cited in the Judicial Watch lawsuit. Los Angeles County settled the lawsuit, admitted that it needed to do a better job maintaining its voter list, but it has since failed to implement the settlement requirements. The voter lists, completely out of date. There's some testimonial complaints that were received during the investigation. The Transparency Foundation put up a website and a help desk where people could online submit complaints about receiving bad ballots at their home. Anthony from Hamul says, as of this date, I've received 11 ballots for 11 people who do not live at this address. Here's another one, Bob from Bakersfield. We've been trying to get Kern County to purge my son's name from the election rolls. He has been a citizen of Texas for the last 13 years. Next one, Michael from Chula Vista gets a triplicate ballot. Not sure how 3 different voter IDs can be issued 3 times to the same person, email address, and home address. How about Will from San Diego, an employee of ours who is a Mexican citizen, lives in Tijuana, has a driver's license in California, and got a ballot in his name here at the office. A ballot for a non-citizen. This other one I think is kind of funny. In 2001, I dated this girl named Sue, and Amanda was her daughter, but we broke up a year later. That's 2002, right? I have not heard from Amanda since. I do not know of her whereabouts, but I got a ballot for her in the mail. That's Keith from Hanford, California. Again, those are anecdotal examples, but the data reflects what people are seeing with their actual experience. So let's look at the problems with ballot harvesting. Over 90% of ballots are now returned by mail, or they are harvested by an individual. Only 10% of ballots are cast at polling stations. This raises the next criteria, which is we need to make sure under criteria 3 that signatures match on the ballot envelope when people are using a mail-in ballot. Unfortunately, the signature reviews that the state of California has put together, the regulations, allow for basically any chicken scratch to be accepted as a signature. In fact, the Secretary of State's regulations are so overly restrictive in preventing a signature from being rejected as to being pretty much in favor of default accepting that a signature is valid. Now, the best way for us to look at this is to look at the data. And there were 9 counties that were asked to provide data on the signature rejections that they made during both the primary and the general election. And 8 counties provided data. Fresno County violated California Public Records Act requirements. We could have sued them, but we could. The survey was able to be done even without their compliance with the records request. So shame on Fresno County. But if you take a look at the numbers here, there's a huge disparity between many of these counties. Again, Sacramento County in the primary rejected 0.24% of ballots, while San Joaquin rejected 2.18% of ballots. Now, it doesn't mean that San Joaquin is overly aggressive because you take a look at the cure rate. It's in line with the rest of the state of California, slightly above, but pretty much in line. The conclusion can be made that Sacramento County is accepting chicken scratch. And this is a problem because if you don't have equal application of voting laws, it's depriving voters of due process and equal protection. General election, the same thing, but I want to show you percent deviation in the general election. Sacramento was an 82% lower rejection rate than the state of California average as a whole, whereas Orange County was 55% higher rejection rate. Again, we would want to look at what is Orange County doing differently than Sacramento, and which is better, and which system should we apply statewide. So signature reviews clearly are not being done properly because you have this great disparity between counties, unless you're trying to argue that somehow the voters in Sacramento have perfect penmanship, more so than in any of the other counties in the state, which is absurd. Criteria 4, no verification on citizenship is happening in the state of California. One of the easiest ways to do this is the jury summons that's sent out to the public comes from the voter file. And on that summons, there's actually the first question for disqualification to get out of jury service is, I'm not a U.S. citizen. Unfortunately, many of the jury commissioners will not share that information with the county registrar of voters. And they certainly aren't sharing it with us. We ask jury commissioners for documentation, copies of affidavits where people say they're not a citizen. They refuse to provide it to us. It would be a very easy way to audit whether the state of California is doing a good job of verifying citizenship. What we did find from our interviews with the county election officials is that they have said that there is no surefire way to verify citizenship and that the state of California DMV does nothing more than the honor system. This is a problem. Criteria 5, accessibility of voting, a failure here. And this is where that polling station manipulation comes into play. So Democrats in California are in favor of mail-in ballots. The polls show that the Democrat voters prefer mail-in ballots. Republican voters don't like mail-in ballots. They prefer going to an actual polling location on election day. So sort of like a rite. It's like a tradition for them. Well, everyone knows that, and the data shows that in terms of public polling. So if the politicians in California cut polling locations on election day saying, well, we already mailed out the ballot to everyone and everyone likes using mail-in ballots, they've created clearly a case where they run the risk of suppressing votes. And if you run the risk of suppressing votes, if there's any case to be made, then federal judges under federal legislation can order the state to open more polling stations. And we got anecdotal testimony from poll workers who've said that, quote, we do not have enough in-person vote centers on election day. One of the poll workers in San Diego, where we saw this 80+% reduction, 87% reduction in polling locations. It was a disaster in San Diego, and yet the liberal media refused to cover the story. Imagine that. And so we need to have a review of the accessibility of voting to make sure that all voters, black, brown, white, rural, suburban, urban, and yes, conservative-leaning and liberal-leaning voters, that they all have equal opportunity to use a mode of voting to their liking. Criteria 6, election security, another fail. And again, a lot of states are failing at election security in terms of the cybersecurity threats. But we know that the state of California, while it has a task force on the issue, has yet to implement the national standards that have been recommended for election technology system security. Criteria 7 is interference in elections. And here, California politicians are the worst of the worst. They are using taxpayer funds to boost turnout in very specific constituencies that benefit the ruling party, the Liberal Party. And so when you see the use of taxpayer money to harvest ballots, which we have captured and documented contracts that have been given out by politicians, Democrat politicians, to Democrat groups, liberal groups to harvest ballots. That shows that they're trying to boost turnout for one outcome of the election versus another. We also see the use of monies to manipulate the redistricting efforts in 2022, as well as monies going to groups that are promoting ballot measure positions, voting yes and no on tax increases, actually voting yes on all those tax increases. And finally, there are numerous examples of local government agencies using taxpayer money to do polling and marketing in favor of tax hikes that they've placed on the ballot, including Los Angeles County, which was sanctioned by the Fair Political Practices Commission for violating state law in using taxpayer money to influence the outcome of an election. This sort of bad behavior has to stop. Criteria 8 is ballot titles. And again, who can forget the gas tax repeal initiative in 2018, where 1 million voters signed that petition for the gas tax repeal, and yet California politicians struck the title of gas tax repeal and instead put in repeals road repair projects. Absolute manipulation of the voter title. And then finally, criteria 9 and 10, ballot curing and tracking. Actually, California does a pretty good job. And where California does a good job, we're happy to acknowledge that and give them credit. California has a Track My Ballot online system that very much is reliable to track ballots and whether your ballot's received and whether your ballot has been counted. And we commend California for using the Ballot Track My Ballot portal. There's also ample examples of California providing for a very open process for individuals whose signatures were rejected to cure any sort of deficiency on their signature. The list is provided to campaigns. Notices are sent to voters immediately when the ballot signature is rejected to try to make it as easy as possible for that voter to correct whatever deficiency there is and have their vote counted. Finally, audit criteria 10, post-election auditing, another fail. This is where there are some risk-limiting audits that are done throughout the state that only look at whether a machine tally corresponds with what a hand tally would have come up with. And that's only in certain jurisdictions for certain ballots that use machines. We want to see an audit prior to the election of whether the voter list has been maintained properly. We want to see an audit of whether signatures have been properly rejected or properly accepted. And you can do that using a random sample. And we want to see a full audit of rejected signatures that are not cured, going out and trying to find out for those voters whether someone intercepted their ballot and returned it without their permission. Again, that's where the audit of Transparency Foundation is so crucial. They took these ballots that were rejected for bad signatures and that the voter never came and fixed it, despite multiple attempts to reach the voter. And Transparency Foundation went out and spent months tracking these people down. And they actually did track down a sample that was large enough to be used for the survey, 388. Which is statistically very relevant given the whole size of ballots that were removed or rejected and uncured in the election. Now, the good news, 81.7% said, yeah, I tried to vote. So that's good. But 14.17% said, I never tried to vote. I haven't lived in this. A lot of them said that they don't live in the state of California and haven't lived here for many years. And then 4.12% said they can't remember if they voted. Now, I mentioned it was very hard to find these people. I suspect that 14.17% is exponentially higher. Because if you can't reach someone, chances are they're dead, they're no longer at that location, or they're long gone to another state. So that 14.17% is the floor, not the ceiling. This is actual detection of voter fraud. When someone whose ballot was returned with a bad signature on their behalf says, I did not send that in, I did not sign that, I did not vote, I no longer live in California, I never saw my ballot, the question very simply needs to be asked, who got that ballot? Who voted? But no one in the media wants to do any of this sort of analysis or ask any of these questions. This is not hard to figure out. These questions and these analyses and these audits are not hard to perform, but your California politicians and your state-run media refuse to acknowledge it. Again, I'm not for conspiracy theories. I'm for facts. I'm for public trust and confidence. And it's clear that California has an election integrity problem. That's why at Reform California, we continue to fight for a few things. Number one, we want to pass an initiative in the next election requiring voter ID using your driver's license, both on mail ballots as well as in-person balloting. It also would require that polling stations be measured in terms of the wait time to ensure that no voter suppression is happening. And third, it requires an update and an audit of the voter registration lists in the state of California, as well as a post-election audit to ensure that signature matches are done properly and that no significant detection of fraud occurs. We need help with that ballot measure. And so I urge you to go online to electionintegrityinitiative.org, electionintegrityinitiative.org, and join the fight. Also, share this video. Please like and subscribe this video, because the liberal media doesn't want to report on this, but we can get a better placement with YouTube's algorithm when you share, like, and subscribe to this channel, particularly liking and sharing this video. So please do that as well. Check out the full report on election integrity online at electionintegrityca.org, electionintegrityca.org. And it is a very important read, because it has all sorts of backup data for you to use. Actually, it's electionintegrityca.com. I got that website wrong. I wanted to check it real quick before we concluded the video. Electionintegrityca.com, electionintegrityca.com. That will take you to Transparency Foundation's website with the full report on election integrity in 2021, 2022. So join the fight. Do not be deterred. Recognize that the public does share your concern with the lack of election integrity in the state of California. And all voters, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, all voters deserve to have public trust and confidence in the outcome of these elections. Working together, we can accomplish that mission. Thanks for watching. Help us break through the censorship of the liberal media by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and subscribe to my YouTube channel.